Today we'll be looking at the presidencies of John Tyler and James K. Polk and just the issue of manifest destiny in general. First off, let's talk about his accidency. So, upon the death of William Henry Harrison, who shortly after giving his inaugural speech catches a cold/flu and dies with shortly after about a month in office, which means that John Tyler, his vice president, will now assume the office of president. So you're going to see a really interesting question. Will John Tyler follow the campaign goals of William Henry Harrison? And in fact, a lot of people are still unclear about what those were. They knew he was a Whig candidate, but he had promised a lot of different things. Tyler essentially is what we would call a Whig in name only, as in he ran for that as in office as the vice president of William Henry Harrison, but essentially is going to go his own route as president. He's really a states' rights Jeffersonian, similar to Jefferson or Jackson that we have seen before. So he's really contradictory to this big government and a large economic overshadowing of a government that the Whigs were known for. So the question with Tyler and the Whig agenda is he going to support Henry Clay's American system goals that guys like Clay and Webster had been proponents of for so long? Well, one thing that he does is that he does repeal the independent treasury. The independent treasury is something that Martin Van Buren had put in place as a way to separate American government funds from the actual economy itself, which is an example of kind of a small government, especially involvement in economic stance. On the flip side, however, Tyler does veto the Third National Bank, which is obviously one of the biggest components of Clay's American system. And it's really this controversial issue that actually means the Whigs are going to kick him out of the party. And overall, what we look at this is a president without a party. He doesn't have backing from his own party base. And that really spells a doom for him in trying to have any kind of re-election campaign. Some other interesting aspects of foreign policy during John Tyler's presidency. One, we have what's called it's an Aroostook War, and we say war in quotations because it's more saber-rattling than anyone actually fighting. A couple armies massed particularly around this Maine border because this is disputed still from American Revolution and War of 1812. So they need to settle what is really the border between Maine and Canada, and that will be settled at the Webster-Ashburton Treaty in 1842. Also, the annexation of Texas, which we'll be talking about a lot more, is a pervading question as well throughout Tyler's presidency. And he'll do that as one of his last acts on the way out. And by that, I mean annexing Texas. So let's talk about the election of 1844. This is all about manifest destiny and the United States' ideas about expanding west. John Tyler does not have the support of his party, so he's not even going to be a viable candidate. Instead, you're going to have Henry Clay representing the Whig Party versus James K. Polk of the Democrats. James K. Polk, relatively unheard of for a couple years, had retired from public office, was a senator from Tennessee, and definitely had experience as a politician. But a lot of people view him as a dark horse candidate. James K. Polk, though, is an expansionist, and he's got some very big goals for the United States. He wants to add Texas, which we'll be dealing with in just a few moments slide-wise. He wants to add Oregon and settle disputes with the British. The campaign slogan, 54-40 or fight, refers to the line of latitude that we're trying to acquire more territory than traditionally we kind of had in that Oregon area. And then he's even looking at maybe even adding California as well from the newly independent Mexican Republic. Polk wins very narrowly in a sense with about 62%. New York was a really big swing state for him that helped. And so as a result, Polk, the dark horse coming out of nowhere, kind of is now your new president. What we take this as is the mandate for expansion, for the United States to continue going and adding more territory out west. Oh, and we love going west, don't we? All right, let's talk about quote-unquote young Hickory in office. All right, I'm not going to lie, big fan of James K. Polk. He's a guy that has specific goals. He accomplishes them, doesn't even run for presidency again. Promises everyone one term, does it, does what he's supposed to do, he's out. That's kind of impressive. All right, so one, wants to reduce tariffs. The Walker Tariff of 1846 does that. Tariffs have always been a controversial issue throughout United States history, and he wants to further help support American trade abroad by reducing that tariff. He wants to follow the the Democratic idea under Martin Van Buren of the independent treasury system. So that is reestablished where we're housing our funds outside of American banks in an independent treasury, so it's not involved in our economic system. Want to settle the issue over Oregon, determining whether or not it should be the 5440 line. We'll split the difference at the 49th parallel in the Oregon Treaty of 1846. This had been an area of dispute. Both the United States and Britain had been occupying it at the same time in kind of a joint occupation. This is actually the line that you see today at that 49th parallel. Finally, the idea of acquiring California and Texas are going to be big proponents of, or big objectives, of his run in office. So let's talk about Texas in general. We've kind of skirted around this for a while, but Mexico gets its independence from Spain in 1821. Upon that, they'll establish their own constitution in 1824 of its own republic. Once they successfully, achieve their independence after a couple years of duking it out. So in 1824, you have a newly independent Mexico. As a result, they're going to encourage Americans to occupy the northernmost reaches of Mexico, what we would call modern-day Texas today. And that's guys like Moses Austin and his son Stephen F. Austin that helped bring American settlers into that area. And so within about 10 years, the Americans start to outnumber the Mexican population almost at a 3-to-1 margin. Now, originally, the Mexicans have wanted the Americans there to be a buffer zone between, say, the Indian territories of Oklahoma, but that becomes to be a growing issue. Essentially, Texans, American citizens that move into this Texas area start to chafe along the idea that Mexican government declares that they need to devote to being Catholic, a lot of them being Protestant, and they have to swear allegiance to the government of Mexico, not to their initial American allegiance. So just like the American Revolution, committees of correspondence between areas in Texas are going to be formed. And you're going to see the idea of revolution and independence spring or come about. So in 1836, you have a Declaration of Independence as Texas declares its independence from the Mexican government, and unfortunately some conflict will ensue as a result. Particularly a couple things you want to take note of: the Battle of San Jacinto right here, and the Battle of the Alamo, which we'll be talking about shortly. So early on, the Texans will go on the offensive. They're fighting against General Santa Anna, who's in charge of Mexico at this time, and early on are outmatched. One of the most infamous battles in American history, the Stand at the Alamo. About 300 American citizens are holed up at this church in Texas, and they're surrounded by General Santa Anna. Guys like Jim Bowie, Davy Crockett are inside, and they hold out as long as they can. They know it's a futile last stand. Sam Houston, who's in charge of the Texas Army, actually wants them to leave and abandon this fort. The Alamo is overrun. Everyone is killed inside of it, but it becomes this rallying cry for the Texans. Remember the Alamo, they would say. Because of the Alamo, more Americans will join the fight, but you're also seeing, as a result of Santa Anna's successes, retreating towards the United States border. The real turning point is led by Sam Houston. Sam Houston convinces enough people to turn, stand, and with a surprise attack on Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto, is actually where Sam Houston and the Texan forces are successful, and they'll actually capture General Santa Anna. As a result, this forces a Mexican withdrawal from the Texas territory, and Texas has its independence. The Texans immediately want to become a state in the United States or a territory. Will the United States annex it? And that's going to be a question for about a decade. But up to that point, Texas is basically its own independent country from this time frame. So it's a pretty interesting period in Texan history. A lot of congressmen in the United States are wary because slavery had been allowed in Texas. And so if we add Texas in the United States, that's another slaveholding territory. So is that a slavery plot to further add